The hemlocks along Black Ridge did not burn like ordinary trees. They bled resin in boiling amber streams before detonating into towers of orange fury. For 3 days, the Northline wildfire had chewed through 7,000 acres of unmapped wilderness, swallowing timber stands older than the country itself. Smoke hung over the ravine like a bruised sky, so dense that noon felt like twilight, and the sun was reduced to a dull, blood-colored coin. Veteran hotshot Josh Vance wiped a slurry of soot and sweat from his eye sockets, his Nomex jacket stiffened by dry heat and ash. The line's holding at the creek bed, Vance, but the wind is switching, shouted Miller, his voice raw from inhaling pulverized pine bark. Miller spat a dry clump of black spit onto the scorched duff and braced his Pulaski axe against the fallen log. If the canopy takes fire up on the ridge, this whole bowl becomes an oven before the air tankers can make another pass. Josh nodded, checking the fuel gauge on his chainsaw while the roar of the fire echoed through the canyon like an approaching freight train. Old-timers in the valley down below had warned the Forestry Service about Black Ridge long before the lightning strike ignited the brush. They spoke in lowered voices at the diner near Route 9, calling the high country the domain of the Silent Keeper, a creature older than the logging roads, possessing an intellect as cold and sharp as obsidian. Off-grid hunters claimed to have found 5-toed tracks twice the size of a man's boot, embedded deep in the river mud, pressed down with force enough to crush river pebbles into sand. Josh had always dismissed those whispers as mountain campfire fodder, the kind of ghost stories bored rangers invented to keep tourists on marked trails. Yet, as the wind shifted, sending a wave of superheated air cascading down the slope, the hair on the back of Josh's neck stood rigid. It wasn't the heat that made skin crawl on his arms, it was the absolute certainty that two colossal eyes were locked onto his back through the curtain of grey smoke. High above the crackling tree line, where thermals whipped ash into swirling tornadoes, a silhouette towered beside the ancient Douglas fir. It stood nearly 9 feet tall, massive and broad as a timber frame barn, remaining completely motionless against the backdrop of roaring red flames. Normal wildlife fled in sheer panic. Elk trampled their own calves, black bears bolted blindly off cliff edges, and snakes roasted in their burrows. But this shape did not run. It observed with a terrifying deliberate calm that defied every law of nature. The creature stood downwind of the firestorm, where the air was thickest with suffocating carbon monoxide, unbothered by the stinging cinders raining around it. Its long matted pelt was colored like burnt wood and damp earth, seamlessly blending into charred trunks until it was almost invisible unless it shifted. Josh froze, his gloved hand resting heavy on his saw's throttle, his vision tunneling onto the giant shadow across the gully. "Vance, keep moving. We need to clear another 50 yards of brush before the spot fires cross." Miller barked from 30 feet down the slope. Josh snapped his gaze back to his crewmate, blinking against the searing sting of rising smoke. When he looked back toward the fir tree a second later, the ridge was empty, save for dancing embers and burning branches. He swallowed down the dry lump in his throat, telling himself the heat was playing tricks on his exhaustion, though deep down he knew no shadow could look that solid or deliberate. 10 minutes later, as Josh swung his Pulaski into a tangle of chokecherry, a desperate, high-pitched bleat pierced through the thunder of the burning woods. Nearby, trapped against a rusted stretch of legacy barbed wire left over from early cattle ranches, a young doe thrashed in sheer terror. The fire was advancing rapidly down the ravine, a wall of flame 15 feet high, chewing through dry underbrush toward the pinned animal. The doe's hide was already singed. Her nostrils flared wide as she kicked wildly, tangling the wire deeper into her hind legs. "Leave it, Josh. We gotta pull back to the drop zone," Knox yelled over the radio, his voice crackling through the static-laced speaker. Josh looked at the advancing wall of fire, then at the animal's terrified eyes, glowing amber in the firelight. Ignoring the order, Josh unhooked his heavy wire cutters from his harness and charged straight into the radiant heat. The heat blistered his cheeks instantly, making every breath feel like inhaling powdered glass. Working with quick, violent snaps, Josh sheared through the rusted barbs while keeping his boots clear of the animal's sharp hooves. Smoke poured over them in a suffocating cloud, reducing visibility to less than 3 feet. On the third cut, the final strand snapped and the doe scrambled to her feet, bolting up the safe eastern bank into the dense brush. Josh collapsed back against the unburned stone outcrop, coughing violently as he caught his breath. Up on the ridge, directly above him, concealed within the dense plume of grey smoke, the giant creature watched the entire rescue without making a sound, its deep amber eyes reflecting the golden fury of the forest fire, narrowed with an intelligent, analyzing focus. Unlike every other beast in these mountains, it understood what the man had done. It recognized an act of mercy amidst the chaos of death. As Josh scrambled back to join his crew, the creature inhaled deep breaths of ash-choked air, turning its massive head toward the ridge top where a fresh wall of flame was quietly cutting off the firefighters' only escape route. By 3 in the afternoon, the temperature inside the canyon had spiked to over 140 degrees, turning the air itself into a suffocating shroud. Josh rejoined Miller and Knox near the dry wash, his lungs burning with every dragged breath as they scraped down to bare mineral soil. The forest was emitting a low, vibrating hum, a terrifying sound known only to seasoned wildland firefighters, signaling that the ground fire was cooking the moisture out of the highest pine needles. When those needles reached ignition temperature, the top of the canopy would explode all at once in a flash of thermal energy. "Radio's dead, Vance. The heat must have fried the handhelds, or the repeater on Bolt Peak took a hit," Knox screamed, slapping his radio against his palm in useless frustration. A massive wall of black smoke tumbled down the slope like an avalanche, blotting out what little ambient light remained. The mountain had grown eerie and silent beneath the roar of the blaze. No birds called, no rodents scurried through the leaf litter, and the usual mountain breeze had turned into a howling gale driven by the fire's own draft. They were completely cut off from the rest of the crew, isolated in a pocket of dying timber. High above them, on a ledge of exposed granite, the silent keeper moved through the burning brush with a ghost-like grace that belied its massive 500-pound frame. The creature did not charge blindly or flinch when falling pine cones showered its matted shoulders with sparks. Instead, it evaluated the fire shifted by the canyon winds, tracking the movement of the 3 men with methodical, calculating patience. It had spent centuries watching humans erect wooden cabins, clear roads, and flee from the seasonal infernos that purged the valleys. It knew the topology of Black Ridge better than any survey map, including where the box canyons formed natural death traps. The creature observed Josh specifically, recognizing the yellow Nomex helmet and broad shoulders of the man who had stood between the wire and the terrified doe. It saw that the man was exhausted, his steps heavy and slightly uneven as he lugged the heavy steel equipment across uneven terrain. Up ahead, a line of deadfall pines caught fire simultaneously, creating an impenetrable barricade of white-hot embers that blocked the northern trail leading down to the river. To the south and west, the firestorm was marching in a sweeping arc, curving like a giant flaming pincer to enclose the drainage bowl. "We're backstand, Josh. The North Ridge just flashed," Miller yelled, his voice cracking with rising panic as he pointed toward a 50-foot wave of flame surging across the gap. "The river trail is gone. We have to deploy shelter blankets right here on the rocks." Josh grabbed Miller by his heavy shoulder harness, pulling him back from a patch of burning scrub. "No, fire shelters won't save us in this trench. The heat will cook us right through the foil. We need to push east toward the granite spine." But even as Josh said it, he saw the flaw in his plan. A thick thicket of mountain laurel between them and the spine had caught fire, spewing thick blue smoke and blazing embers. Suddenly, a heavy dull thud reverberated through the ground, vibrating right through the soles of Josh's heavy leather logging boots. It was not the crack of a falling tree or the rumble of thunder, but a deliberate, powerful impact like a massive boulder being slammed onto stone. 30 yards up, the eastern embankment obscured by drifting curtains of white smoke, stood the massive silhouette. It lifted a 6-foot log, a log that would have taken 3 strong men to lift, and cast it aside into the brush like a pine twig, clearing a gap in the burning barrier. Knox drew his sidearm with a trembling hand, his eyes wide with fear as he stared at the mountain giant emerging through the gloom. "What the hell is that thing? Is that a bear?" Knox shrieked, aiming the pistol toward the shadow. Josh instantly slammed his hand down on Knox's wrist, forcing the barrel toward the dirt before Knox could fire. "Don't shoot! Put it away, Knox. It's not attacking us," Josh commanded, his gaze locked on the glowing amber eye staring down at them from the ledge. The creature did not roar or thump its chest like a mindless beast. It stood upright, its massive chest rising and falling rhythmically despite the thick smoke. It turned its heavy muscular torso toward the east, looking back at Josh with a clear, unmistakable head tilt that signaled movement. It was holding open a narrow corridor along the rock face where the wind was pushing the flames away from the bare granite. "It's showing us an exit," Josh whispered, his mind racing as he recognized the uncanny intelligence in the creature's deliberate gestures. "Follow it, keep your gear on, and move on, now." Knox hesitated for a fraction of a second, his knuckles white around the grip of his holstered sidearm, before the roaring heat behind them shattered his indecision. 100-foot Douglas fir detonated like a pillar of gunpowder just 40 yards downwind, showering the trail in a blizzard of burning bark. Driven by raw survival instinct, Miller and Knox fell in behind Josh as he scrambled up the crumbling shale bank toward the towering creature. The air near the granite shelf was stiflingly hot, yet the heavy pelt of the beast bore only a dusted layer of fine gray ash, seemingly impervious to the flying embers that singed the man's clothing. The creature did not wait for them to draw close. The moment Josh reached the top of the embankment, it turned and moved into the choked wilderness with startling, silent speed. Despite its massive weight, the silent keeper slipped through the dense brush like a ghost, breaking thick cedar branches with effortless sweeps of its long, muscular arms to clear a path. Josh kept his eyes fixed on the dark, hair-covered back ahead, using the creature's massive frame as a shield against the intense thermal radiation blasting off the ridge. Every time the smoke thickened to a blind wall, the creature released a deep, resonant chest grunt that cut straight through the deafening roar of the firestorm, guiding the disorientated firefighters along the safest footholds. They moved along a forgotten game trail that traversed the steepest section of Black Ridge, a treacherous route omitted from every forestry survey map. The path clung to a sheer wall of exposed limestone where fuel was scarce, keeping the advancing wall of flames at a manageable distance down in the canyon floor. Below them, the bowl they had occupied minutes earlier transformed into a churning sea of liquid orange, completely consumed by a firestorm that would have melted their aluminum emergency shelters into slag. Nox stumbled on a loose patch of scree, slipping toward the drop-off with a sharp cry of panic as his heavy pack pulled him downward. Before Josh could reach out, a massive, fur-covered hand, broad as a snowshoe, with dark, thick nails, shot out from the gloom and snared Nox's shoulder harness. With effortless, terrifying power, the creature hoisted the grown man and his 40 pounds of gear back onto solid rock as if he weighed nothing at all. Nox froze, paralyzed with shock, staring into the creature's face just inches from his own. The creature's features were weathered and flat, framed by a thick brow and intelligent ancient eyes that held no malice, only a cold, piercing awareness. It released Nox with a firm push forward, uttering a low rhythmic huff that plainly signaled them to keep moving. It touched me, Josh, Nox stammered, his voice trembling so hard his teeth clicked together despite the stifling heat. It saved my life. Keep your eyes on the trail and move your feet, Josh barked, thrusting Miller ahead to keep their momentum from stalling on the narrow ledge. The thermal updrafts were intensifying, threatening to blow them off the narrow shelf as the fire ignited the remaining pine stands on the southern slope. Up ahead, the ledge narrowed into a cramped chimney of rock where a massive fallen yellow pine blocked the only exit to the eastern plateau. The log was 4 feet in diameter, pinned tightly against the rock face by a mountain of loose boulders and burning debris. Miller threw his weight against the trunk, but the timber did not budge an inch under human force. The fire was sweeping up the ravine behind them, sending tongue-like licks of orange flame climbing up the limestone rock face toward their heels. Smoke began to pull inside the narrow chimney, cutting off their oxygen and forcing all 3 men to their knees, coughing uncontrollably as their lungs screamed for air. The silent keeper stepped forward, shoving Josh gently but firmly behind its massive leg to protect him from the falling debris. Placing its broad shoulders beneath the charred trunk, the creature braced its massive legs against the solid stone floor. Thick muscles rippled beneath its dense dark pelt as it let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated straight to the granite bed beneath their feet. With a violent, explosive surge of brute strength, the creature heaved upward, snapping the trapped timber in two and hurling the heavy log down into the fiery abyss below. The path to the upper plateau was open. The 3 men scrambled through the newly cleared gap, holding themselves onto the broad, open tableland of Gold Creek Ridge. Here, above the tree line where bare granite slabs replaced thick pine stands, the air was dramatically cooler and free of suffocating smoke. Strong mountain winds swept the thick dark plumes westward, away from the plateau, revealing a brilliant sky painted in hues of crimson and indigo by the setting sun. Below them, the North Line fire raged on, a vast swirling sea of red embers and burning canopy, but its reaching flames could no longer touch the safety of the rocky height. Miller collapsed onto his back against a smooth slab of granite, unbuckling his sweat-soaked helmet and gasping in huge, greedily taken mouthfuls of clean mountain air. Knox sat heavily beside him, his hands resting on his knees, staring in silent awe at his singed gloves and the scorched heels of his logging boots. Neither man spoke. The sheer absurdity and terror of their escape left no room for hollow words or nervous explanations. They were alive, completely unharmed, save for minor blisters and smoke-scratched throats, saved by a legend that official forest reports claimed did not exist. Josh remained standing, his heavy leather boots anchored firmly to the rocky edge, as he turned to face the gap they had just traversed. The silent keeper stood 20 yards away, on a high outcrop of stone, framed against the blazing orange backdrop of the canyon fire. Up close, free from the swirling curtains of blinding ash, the creature's true scale was breathtaking. Nearly 9 feet tall, with shoulders broader than a double doorway and a deep, barreled chest built for high-altitude survival. Its thick pelt was dark as jet, laced with streaks of silver along the jaw and shoulders that caught the flickering glare of the inferno below. There was no animalistic wildness in its posture, no baring of sharp fangs or aggressive thumping of its chest. Instead, it surveyed the rescued men with a quiet, stately dignity, an ancient Forrest Guardian checking its charges before returning to the shadows. Its deep amber eyes locked onto Josh's gaze once more, holding the firefighter's eyes in a long, profound moment of silent, mutual recognition. Josh slowly raised his right hand, placing his gloved palm over the center of his chest in an unspoken gesture of gratitude and deep respect. The creature gave a slow, deliberate nod of its massive, conical head, a surprisingly human response that sent a shiver down Josh's spine. Then, with a fluid, silent grace that defied its massive weight, the creature turned its back on the edge of the plateau. It melted into the shadowy spruce thickets of the unburned northern wilderness, its dark fur blending seamlessly into the lengthening mountain shadows until it simply ceased to be. Not a twig snapped, not a single pebble tumbled down the slope to mark its retreat. The silent keeper had vanished as quickly and completely as a mountain mist. 20 minutes later, the distant rhythmic thumping of heavy rotor blades echoed across the ridge as an alpine rescue chopper cut through the smoke layer. The search and rescue spotlight swept across the granite tableland, pinning the 3 firefighters in a beam of bright white light. As the helicopter lowered its winch line to haul the stranded crew to safety, the flight medic leaned out of the side door, shouting over the deafening roar of the rotors, "You guys are bloody lucky. How on earth did you navigate through that chimney wall before it flashed?" Miller and Knox looked at each other, then turned their eyes toward Josh, who stood near the edge of the spruce line looking into the dark woods. Josh adjusted his helmet strap, pulled his heavy gloves tight over his soot-stained hands, and looked back at the medic with a calm, steady expression. "We had a local guide who knows these woods better than anyone," Josh called back over the engine noise, his voice firm and unwavering. He cleared the path and made sure we got out alive. The official incident report logged the survival of Crew 4 as a miraculous escape aided by unexpected wind shifts along the granite ridge. No mention was made in the federal paperwork of giant footprints left along the shale shelf, nor of the massive 4-foot tree trunk hurled into the canyon like a broken matchstick. But late at night, around the station campfires when new recruits ask about the dangers of Black Ridge, Josh Vance simply looks out toward the dark silent tree line. He knows that high up in the cool, untouched peaks, where the wind sings through the ancient pines, the silent keeper still watches over the woods, patient, clever, and endlessly vigilant.